a beautiful true crime mystery set in the North Carolina marshes. Let's talk Where the Crawdads Sing. Hey everyone, this is David Stark from Watch or Pass. Today I'm talking to you about Where the Crawdads Sing, which is coming to theaters on July 15th, 2022. It is a movie that's based on a book by Delia Owens and stars Daisy Edgar-Jones as Kaia, who is an abandoned girl that raised herself in the marshlands of North Carolina. It is an interesting film. I had no idea what to expect going in, and it definitely kind of threw me for a loop. And my hot take is I think you should watch it. Look, it's a beautiful film with a mysterious, slow-burning story, an interesting protagonist, and an ultimately fulfilling ending. I really enjoyed it. I liked the slow pace. I liked the scenery. I liked just kind of learning about Kaia and her struggle and seeing how she lived in this world. And so overall, I definitely think you should watch it. It is not going to be for everyone, though. It is definitely a slow movie, but I loved it. So I'm going to tell you a little more about the film, a few things I liked, a few things I didn't like, and then go into the ending. So as you can imagine, there will be spoilers at the ending section. I will leave it vague up until that point, so you can watch this, get my thoughts. But when I get to the ending section, if you don't want to know what happens, and you might not, then turn this off now. So the ultimate story of Where the Crawdads Sing is you have Kaia, who grew up in the marshlands of North Carolina. She was abandoned at a young age, so she kind of had to grow up on her own and learn kind of how to live on her own. And that leads to a very interesting life for her, but one that is ultimately kind of very lonely, because everyone in town knows her as the Marsh Girl. These stories and rumors about her. She's ostracized because of how she looks, or because she doesn't, have all the things that the other people in town have. And so she just kind of spends her time out in the marshes. But she is a very bright kid. She is a very resourceful kid. And so she ends up getting by. Now, so eventually someone in town dies. This person, Chase Andrews, a star football player, he ends up dead, presumably looking like he either fell or was pushed off of this like observation tower. It's this large tower in the middle of the marshland that you can kind of get up to and look out and see and get a good view of the overall area. And so when he's dead, of course, because everyone in town suspects the Marsh Girl, thinks that she is like weird and evil, she is the one that is ultimately accused of the crime. So the film is a lot about going into her life and trying to figure out like what happened to Chase, and learning more about her backstory. And there's a lot of very interesting pieces to her backstory that you find out as we go along this journey. So things I liked about this movie. The first, I love the setting. Like, it is a really beautiful setting. It is set out in the marshes of North Carolina. So you have kind of like a swamp feel at times, with like water separated by large grass. You have a lot of, are they rivers, lagoons? I'm not really sure. We have a lot of waterways that that Kaia and some of the other people that live out in the marshes traverse in order to get around. And then you also have, because it's a marsh, you have these beautiful beaches that are just kind of outside of the marshland. So you have this like otherworldly swamp kind of feel, and then you have this beautiful beach land just outside the marshes. And the movie spends time both of them and really gives you a perspective on how just peaceful and beautiful this area can be. It is a dangerous area, and it is dangerous to most people, but Kaia seems to have found a way to live in there and be at peace in this marshland, and you kind of get that sense through the movie. The second thing I really loved is the music, and it contributes to this like otherworldly sense you get from being in the marshlands. It has a dreamlike personality. It has a beautiful personality to it. It definitely contributes to your time out there. Like I said, the being out in the marshlands feels like you're in another world. Maybe people who grew up there feel at home, but for me, it felt like I was in a whole new place, and the music helped to accentuate that feeling. The third thing I really loved is the slow building story. This film starts off with the death of Chase Andrews, but you don't see what happens. The movie starts off with them just finding the body, and then they arrest Kaia, and it goes into like her backstory and things that happen in her life, as both the detectives and her lawyer are trying to figure out like what happened to Chase, and why they would suspect Kaia of doing it. And I loved that I love that you just got little bits and pieces throughout. It is a very slowly developing story, but you get a lot of little information, little kernels here and there as you go into Kaia's backstory and learn more about her life. It didn't feel like so much of an investigation as it felt like just an exploration into where Kaia had come from and how she survived. It was fun and at times painful to go back into her life and see how she was able to live in this place that not that many people could survive, let alone a young girl. And the last thing I really loved is the ending. Like it is a fulfilling ending that really builds on everything that we've learned throughout the movie. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it kind of ended perfectly, and it ended in a way that like made me very happy with this overall journey. So things I didn't like as much, I mean, not much. Like, look, I'm not gonna say I didn't like because I like the slow story. If you don't like slow movies, this might not be for you. The one thing that kind of struck out to me is there was some corny writing. Like at times it feels maybe more of like a romance novel in terms of the writing, which is interesting because the movie is overall very well written. I loved Kaia's narration of the marshland and like things that she observed, but occasionally the dialogue can have some corny aspects. So again, not a big thing, not a major thing. And overall, like I said, I really, really enjoyed this movie. So definitely check it out. It comes to theaters on July 15th, 2022. I'm going to go into the ending now. If you don't want to know what happens in this film, I would turn this off now because there will be spoilers. There will be spoilers. So like I said, the film deals a lot with Kaia's backstory. And the first kind of big thing you realize is Kaia had a really rough life growing up. Her father was abusive. She had a happy life with when her father wasn't around, but when he was around and he was abusive, everyone had to kind of like walk on eggshells. She had two sisters and a brother and a mother that loved her, and then her abusive father. So early on, I think it was when Kaia was fairly young, like 9 to 11, somewhere in there, her father beats her mother so badly that her mother up and leaves. Like she just packs up and leaves. I think she's worried for her life. She's worried that he's going to kill her and he's going to kill the kid. So she just leaves. And that was the first kind of big blow to Kaia's life. And then eventually her sisters leave and her older brother leaves. And then finally her younger brother leaves. And so she is just left alone with Pa. So for a little while after everyone left, Pa was actually fairly nice to her. Like he taught her about the marsh. He gave her some of his old things that he thought that she might like. It was a like a stalemate, but it was nice. And then a letter from Ma arrives and he doesn't let Kaia see it. Kaia is like really interested to see what happens. He reads it and then like throws it in the fire and burns it. And Kaia is devastated because she has no idea where her mom is. She has no idea what happened. And this was like the one contact she had, and he is just destroying it. And he also then like burned everything of Ma. So Ma was a painter. He destroyed all of her paintings. He burned all of her clothes. Like he just kind of tries to rid their life of Ma. And after this, one day he just up and left as well. So Kai's alone in the marsh with no one to take care of her, but she gets by. She starts, digging for mussels. She starts selling to the local shop. She starts to try to like build a life, a very unique life, but a life nonetheless. Eventually, while she's out in the marsh, she runs into someone that she knew when she was growing up, but hadn't seen in a while, Tate. And Tate is this like smart, young, nice kid that takes a liking to her and teaches her how to read and discovers like her passion for learning. Like she eventually becomes a voracious reader. She's a very bright kid, but she just never knew how to read. And now that she can read, she is like feeding her mind, feeding her interests. So Tate and Kaia start to read regularly, and that develops into a relationship. But eventually, Tate goes off to college, and he's like, "I'll come back for you," but he doesn't, and that devastates Kaia. But before he left, he noticed that Kaia was a really, really good artist, like a really wonderful natural artist. And so she would draw things from the marsh. She would draw like pictures of animals, shells, leaves, feathers, things that she found in the marsh. And they were amazing, beautiful, and not like anything he had seen before. And so he's like, you should definitely turn these into books. Like here's a bunch of publishers. He like wrote down the names and addresses of a bunch of publishers. Was like, you should turn these into books, send these out. Like people need to see this. And then he left for college. And so he said he would come back. Kaia waited for him, and actually she like prepared a draft, like a book for him to see, but he never came back. He never came back from college. And so she is crushed. Eventually she meets Chase, who is this kind of very conflicted person. Like he's nice to her at times, but then will do things that are callous and insensitive. I really liked his character. I mean, I didn't like his character because he was a jerk, but it was interesting to see like how he was nice to her at some points and then would still like call her Marsh Girl, which, that was definitely not something that he should have done. And it was a nice like reminder that sometimes he's nice, sometimes he's not. And he was a very controlling person for her. Chase was ultimately the person that was murdered somehow. But he starts a relationship with Kaia because look, Kaia's got no one else. Kaia has no one that pays attention to her. And so Chase and Kaia become a thing. But it's a thing that's secret. He only meets her in the marsh. He doesn't ever like acknowledge her in town. He doesn't introduce her to his friends. And eventually we find out that Chase is actually engaged. And so this just causes Kaia to be broken again. She breaks off with Chase. Chase doesn't like that. I don't know if it's a control thing or if he actually likes her, but he says like, look, I have to marry, I think her name was Annie, like a proper person, but I love you. And Kai's like, no, like none of this, go away. And that causes Chase to then become violent. Like he goes and tries to he goes into her house one night and like tries to find her and like knocks over some stuff. Another time when he sees her, he assaults her and tries to rape her, and she fights him off. But he like punches her in the face when that happens, and he clearly is not going to be good for her. And Kaia at this time, she's grown up in the marsh, she's grown up in nature, and she kind of analogizes him to like a predator that won't stop until they get the last bite. Also during this time, we find out that Tate is back. He comes back after 4 years in university, and he tries to say hi to Kaia, and Kaia's like, no, you left, like you left me. He tries to explain like, well, he was worried that she would never leave the marsh and that he would be asking her to like choose the marsh or choose the big city. And then he couldn't have her make that choice, so he just never came back. A really sad excuse. Tate, you should have come back. But now he is like set up at the local laboratory doing biology research, and so he is back in town, he's back around, and he wants to rekindle things with Kaia. Yeah, but maybe not the best time because she is still upset with him. So kind of the underlying story of all of this backstory is who killed Chase Andrews. Chase Andrews, the abusive boyfriend, who killed her. The police think it was Kaia because she had a relationship with him, or at least some sort of secret relationship with him, and they found some fibers on him that matched a hat that was in Kaia's house. But what the movie does a really good job of introducing some other characters that you think might have done it. You've got Tate, who wants her back, cares about her, and also knows that Chase beat her up. You also have a store owner, Jumpin, who cares about her. Like Jumpin and his wife, they kind of watched over her when she was growing up. He kind of thinks of her as a daughter, and he sees her face bruised one day and deduces that Chase did it. So he also gets upset. So you have some good suspects around, and both Tate and Jumpin say, hey, let me know when you're out of town, for different reasons. Tate says you should get out of town for a few days, like go leave town, get out of here, and kind of rebalance yourself. And Jumpin says, hey, when you leave, like let me know. I need to know when you leave so I can like keep tabs on you. But both of those also are great instances for an alibi to be established. So the movie does a really good job of introducing some other suspects into this overall story. Now, Kaia, like I said, Kaia is a really good naturalist. Eventually, she does send her pictures to a publisher, and the publisher loves it. They sign on for a book. They give her, an advance and royalties. Kaia is finally able to use the money to buy the land that she lives on. She had owned it, or her grandfather owned it. It had passed down to her, but she needed to pay the back taxes in order to actually own it. So she's able to pay the back taxes, get the land, and then make improvements, turn it into like a proper, still marsh house, but a nice house that has some modern conveniences that she didn't have growing up. And the publisher also wanted her to go meet at this book conference, which was in South Carolina. So they paid for her to go out to South Carolina for this conference. And while she was there, that was when Chase was killed. Establishing an alibi? Maybe. Who knows? But that is a wrinkle in this overall investigation. So eventually we get to the trial. We get to the actual evidence at trial. And there's a little bit of evidence, but nothing major. Like essentially, the theory of the prosecution is Kaia was at this conference in South Carolina, far away. She left early. Everyone saw her because she was all dressed up to go meet her publishers, and they're like, well, Marsh Girl's all like dolled up, like that looks weird. And so she clearly was seen. The prosecution's theory is like, hey, she took the bus back from South Carolina, got back into town at 1:30 a.m. No one saw her. She was able to lure Chase up into the observation tower, murder him, wipe down all the fingerprints, all the evidence, because there were no fingerprints at the scene, and then take the 2:30 a.m. bus back to South Carolina, get there in time to then show up for breakfast with her publishers at 7. She had dinner with her publishers that night before and then had breakfast with them the next morning. Pretty far-fetched theory, but that's their theory. And there's some other evidence that comes up as well. There was a witness that saw Kaia threatened Chase, but this was after Chase had sexually assaulted her and tried to rape her. So you know what? She needed to make that threat anyways because he was dangerous. And you also have another big piece of the evidence was that Chase had this necklace that Kaia made him. It was like a shell necklace that she crafted for him, and he always wore it. He never took it off, which does show that maybe he did have some feelings for her, but he was still a jerk. That necklace had disappeared, and no one knew where it was. But the prosecution was like, the only person that have a reason to take that necklace is Kaia. Like, she's the one that gave it to him. She's the one that kind of had emotions for it. So why would anyone else want to take that necklace? But that was essentially the extent of the prosecution's theory. So we go through trial, we hear the evidence, and eventually the jury comes back and finds her not guilty because the theory was so crazy. Like, how could she possibly come back at 1:30 a.m., no one sees her, kills Chase, leave at 2:30 a.m., no one sees her, and just be perfectly normal at her publisher's meeting the next day? So after the trial, she's a little kind of like standoffish with Tate, and I was like, oh, maybe she knows that Tate did it. Maybe then, and she doesn't like want to like associate with him. Again, always introducing these like other angles. But eventually Tate comes by that night, they make up, they start having a relationship, and they form a life together. And then the movie kind of progresses. It shows them getting old, it shows them living in this house, it shows them kind of enjoying nature, and Kaia continuing to write her books. She publishes multiple other books. The first book was like the shells of the North Carolina coast. The later books were like insects of the North Carolina coast, seabirds, mushrooms. She keeps writing books, and she keeps kind of doing what she loves. And we also see, you know, eventually Jumpin dies, and they go to the funeral. So we see a lot of things that happen in her life. And eventually we see Kaia in the boat. She's older, and she looks up and she sees her mother, kind of like a vision coming from the swamp. And while she's looking at her, we see Kaia through various phases of her life that we've seen. We see Kaia as a young girl, we see Kaia as like a young adult, and then we see Kaia as an older lady, all kind of like reaching out for her mother and crying. And then we see Tate the next morning going out to the dock, going to see Kaia's boat, and seeing Kaia in there dead. So that was Kaia's life. Tate packs up the house. He kind of he takes all of her stuff and carefully wraps it and sends it to North Carolina in their conservation lab, because Kaia had collected a ton of stuff about the North Carolina swamp. So it makes perfect sense. And while he's going through her stuff, we see a book with, you know, a bunch of sketches. And one of those sketches has Chase wearing that shell necklace. He opens the book more and sees cut into the book, like cut into the pages, like a secret compartment almost, there's the shell necklace. And he looks horrified by this. Like he realizes what happened, that Kaia somehow did it, right? Like Kaia did it. But you know, Kaia grew up in the marsh. She had a very natural nature kind of feel to all of this. And so in her mind, Chase was a predator that needed to get dealt with, and she had no sympathy for it. She had no kind of concern for it. It's just like nature. Like sometimes nature, the predators get taken out, and that's just how it was. So Tate takes the shell and kind of like throws it in the marsh. He doesn't want that evidence around. And while he's doing that, there's some really nice voiceover. You know, it's Kaia saying like, I am the marsh now. I am the feather of an egret. I'm a shell washed up on the shore. I'm a firefly. You'll see hundreds beckoning far into the dark reaches of the marsh, and that's where you'll always find me, way out yonder where the crawdads sing. So there you go. Where the crawdads sing is kind of like the deep parts of the marsh, and that's where the title of the movie came. The line also came up earlier when the youngest brother left. He told Kaia if she ever needed to hide, if Pa ever got violent, that she should run and hide deep in the marsh where the crawdads sing. So there's two instances where you hear that. But what an ending. I love the ending. I love that you didn't really know what was going to happen. I expected you to never know. I expected them to not even touch it. Like we wouldn't ever find out what happened to Chase. But then just that having him find that shell at the end was a really kind of fulfilling surprise, and kind of, you know, it is still a far-fetched theory, but I did like that it did give some closure to the overall film. So that is Where the Crawdads Sing. It comes to the theaters July 15, 2022. I definitely think you should check it out. And thanks so much for watching. If you like this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.